The flower of Orchid, a folk tale from Arunachal Pradesh. People hold various beliefs and legends about orchids and similarly beautiful flowers. It is said that once there was a very kind and honest king who ruled over a realm filled with high mountains, dense forests, lush gardens, flowing rivers, and beautiful animals and birds. The king took great care of his subjects who were very happy under his rule. His kingdom lacked nothing. The king had a small family, queen and a princess. The king had no sons. Therefore, the queen, the kingdom's chief minister, commander, royal priest, and others suggested that he remarry. But the king did not heed their advice. He loved the queen dearly and did not want to remarry at any cost. The king's life was very happy. His daughter had grown up. The princess was kind-hearted, gentle, and uniquely beautiful like her mother. Her beauty and charm were discussed in neighboring states, and kings from nearby realms began sending marriage proposals for their princess. However, the princess was not interested in marriage yet, so the king had not accepted any proposals. The princess had a magnificent palace. Behind the palace was a lush garden with beautiful trees that bore delicious fruits. The princess, along with her friends, would go to the garden behind the palace every morning and stay there until the sun became too hot, returning to the palace when it did. Walking in the garden was the princess' favorite pastime. One morning, as usual, the princess was walking in the garden with her two friends. Suddenly, she felt a terrible smell around. She mentioned the smell to her friends and went to sit on the edge of the well. As soon as she sat down, she felt worse and fainted. The moment the princess fainted, her two friends panicked. They managed to support her and brought her back inside the palace. A servant of the princess informed the king of her fainting. The king was in the court at that time. As soon as he heard the news of the princess fainting, he came to the princess's palace with the royal physician. The royal physician examined the princess. He only understood that some foul smell was the cause of the princess's unconsciousness. The prince's friends also told the royal physician before the king that the princess had complained of a foul smell before fainting. Gradually, a week passed. The princess had not regained consciousness yet. The royal physician was giving her various medicines, but none had any effect. The king, the queen, and all the people of the state were very sad and praying to God for the princess's speedy recovery. Another week passed in the same way. But the princess did not regain consciousness. During this time, the royal physician consulted with other physicians from his state and neighboring states and gave the princess very powerful medicines, but all were ineffective. The king and queen had been sitting by the princess for 2 weeks. They could not bear to see the princess' condition. The princess had been unconscious for 2 weeks without eating or drinking. Seeing the medicines of the royal physician and his fellow physicians ineffective, the worries of the king and queen were increasing. They did not understand what to do and what not to do. In this way, a month passed. The princess was still unconscious. Her beautiful pink face had turned pale, and darkness had gathered around her eyes. The king, the queen, the royal physician, and his fellow physicians had all lost hope. Now they only had God to rely on. Suddenly an idea came to the one-man mind. The man immediately got up from his place and reached the king, standing with folded hands. He suggested to the king that he should have a proclamation made in his kingdom and neighboring states that whoever would cure the princess would be rewarded with gold coins. The king liked this suggestion of the man. He made it even more attractive by telling the commander to announce that whoever would cure the princess would be given half of the kingdom as a reward. Following the king's command, the commander had the proclamation made in his and the neighboring states, announcing the reward of half the kingdom. From the next day, one experienced physician after another started coming. They gave the best medicines to the princess in greed for half the kingdom, but to no avail. In the end, they returned. This sequence continued for 15 days. The king, the queen, the chief minister, the commander, the royal physician, the royal priest, all had become hopeless. There was no hope left for the princess's recovery. It was morning time. Suddenly, a servant entered the princess's palace and reported that a young man had come. He claimed that he would cure the princess. The king saw a ray of hope. He ordered the soldier to bring the young man with full honors. The soldier obeyed the king's command and brought the young man inside the palace. The young man first greeted the king and the queen and then asked them to tell the whole story. Instead of the king, the prince's friend told the young man the story of the princess walking in the garden and feeling the foul smell until she fainted. The young man listened to the whole thing carefully. After that, he asked to take the princess to the garden. The king said nothing to the young man. He ordered the princess servants to set up a comfortable bed in the garden and then take the princess to the garden. The king's order was immediately followed, and a magnificent bed was set up in the garden. Then 4 servants carried the princess to the garden. The young man had the princess's bed placed under a tree. It was springtime. The mild morning sun felt very pleasant. The princess lay unconscious on the bed under the tree. The king, the queen, and other people of the state stood around her. Everyone's eyes were on the young man. Suddenly, the young man closed both his eyes, raised his hands towards the sky, and began to murmur, perhaps praying to God. Then, he pulled out a flute from inside his clothes and started playing it. The sound of the flute held a divine joy. Such was the magic in its sound that everyone was enchanted. Suddenly, a miracle occurred. The tree under which the princess was lying burst into fragrant flowers, and its blossoms began to fall upon her. Now, the young man wandered around the garden playing his flute. As he passed under each tree while playing, the trees would become laden with flowers. At that moment, the princess regained consciousness. She sat up and began to look around at the flowers scattered all around the garden in amazement. Neither the princess nor anyone else had ever seen such flowers before. The king, the queen, and all the people of the kingdom were overjoyed. They began to inquire about the princess's well-being and momentarily forgot about the young man. When they remembered him, he was already gone. The king and his servants tried hard to find him, but he was nowhere to be found. The next day, everyone saw that all the trees in the kingdom were blooming with colorful flowers and their fragrance filled the atmosphere. It is said that this young man emerges every spring playing his flute, and as he does, all the trees become covered with flowers, spreading a charming fragrance everywhere.